The pain was knowing I wanted to stop drinking, but not knowing how.
I commend your bravery in being able to kind of actually say, no, I'm an alcoholic.
I ended up using AA as another thing to tell myself I was failing at. Was wrapped up with the expectations of what it is to be a man, a father, a husband, societal expectations of masculinity. And I shared things in those rooms that I had not told anyone before.
I think it's important for all men to know they're not alone. Welcome to the Upward Spiral podcast, where we explore the transformative power of intentional living to break free of limitations and discover what we're truly capable of. So in this episode today, we are deep diving into the complexities of masculinity, challenging societal expectations, and uncovering the strength that lies in vulnerability. So look, if you're a man feeling the weight of the man-up mentality, or you're anyone, honestly anyone, just seeking a more authentic and fulfilling life, this episode is for you. I'm your host, Michelle, and 2 years ago, I made the decision to quit alcohol. Rethinking my relationship with alcohol, I discovered more of my true potential and embarked on a journey to a healthier, happier, and more purposeful life. So today, joining me is a man who's not only transformed his own life, but is now dedicated to empowering other men to do the same. He's a coach, a father, and a champion for redefining masculinity. He's someone who understands the struggle of navigating societal expectations and the courage to break free from them. With his inspiring story, unwavering commitment to helping others, I'm really honoured to introduce you to the founder of the Feel Good Folk, Tim Barber. Hey Tim, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. Pleasure to be here with you today. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. How's sunny London?
Well, I'm just outside London and it's definitely not sunny. But, you know, I don't think we've come to expect anything better these days.
You know what's really funny? I've lived in Asia now for over 10 years, and it's, 30 degrees every single day of the year, and it's hot and humid and everything. But this time of year, I really start to crave autumn. And it's like my body starts getting ready for it almost, I start to feel like it's coming. And it's such a strange feeling because it doesn't come with seasons.
Well, it's also the retail sector's way of letting you know that the seasons are changing is going anywhere and seeing Halloween decorations, right? So that's normally the signal that autumn's here. Yeah,
exactly. And I just really miss autumn. I miss like starting to layer and the beautiful colors, the crunching of the leaves. It's still cool but not cold. I think I miss it actually. I think it's probably the season that I miss the most.
Yeah, well, you're a runner as well, right? Some of those mornings, those crisp mornings when you go out in that weather, then those are some of the best ones for me.
Oh yeah, it's gorgeous. But we do celebrate Halloween here as well, and it's particularly kind of the neighborhood that we live in Singapore. Is all the houses get decorated and the kids do trick or treating, and it's my kids are 5 and 3, and it's just like they talk about Halloween all year round.
Oh yeah, amazing. Yeah, mine are 8 and 7. So we're still in like dressing up is okay phase, but they're starting to appreciate more like the sweets that come with it rather than the design of all the Halloween decorations.
Yeah, I love it. And we've been doing the Switch Witch, which is controversial. The Switch Witch is when they come home with the big buckets of like candy and chocolate and everything, and they're allowed to pick 5 pieces from the bucket. And then they leave the candy out for the Switch Witch. And the Switch Witch overnight will take the candy away and leave them a present.
Oh, that's a good one. Okay.
Loads of people online were like, this is super controversial. Like, you just let the kids have the candy.
Yeah.
But they get so much and it makes them so hyper. I'm like, I'm trying to, we did the Switch Witch last year and it went down really well. So I'm going to stick
and
with
also
it.
Like, I think we know enough by now to discredit or not solely make the decisions based on other people's opinions online.
Oh, really? That's how I make all my big life decisions.
I know. Shock horror.
I consult Reddit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we've totally digressed.
Halloween
we're here
done,
to
Reddit
talk.
done.
I know we're here to talk about masculinity and sobriety and everything. So let's get into that a little bit. Tell me a little bit about your journey, maybe from alcohol dependence to sobriety, and what was the moment that you realized something needed to change?
Yeah, I honestly, it played out over a number of years because, you know, particularly growing up in England, and, you know, a provincial town in England, and in the era that we did, like, drinking culture was very normal. You know, you drink young, you drink early, you drink often, and in the UK, like, every major life event is accompanied by alcohol, right? Like weddings, alcohol; funerals, alcohol; birthdays, alcohol; good day, booze; bad day, booze. Like, it's just everywhere, right? And particularly when I went to university, it was just what you did, you know, and it became almost an accomplishment to drink as much as you could in one night and still be able to make your lecture the next day, or not, as the case may be. So honestly, I think I've mostly had a relatively unhealthy but also quite normal relationship with alcohol in terms of societal expectations. Like, one of the things that I heard from friends when I told them that I was stopping, and that was because I was an alcoholic, was surprise, because no one thought that what I was doing was abnormal. But I'd say it played out over a number of years, partly because I was drinking to a pretty unhealthy level, but it just felt like what you did. And then really the accelerant, if you like, was COVID and the lockdowns. So my kids were 3 and 5 at the time. I was fortunate enough to stay in employment because I worked for an online dog food business, and so everyone was buying dogs and they couldn't go to shops. So suddenly online dog food went bananas, and we were living in a flat, and suddenly everything just came, you know, felt like it was coming on top of me. And what was already probably an unhealthy relationship with alcohol just accelerated because, you know, there was no commute, there was no office, so you're sitting at home working. It rolls around to 5:30, 6, and you crack open a drink, and that was it for the evening. You had nothing to do the next day apart from sit up and start again. And so I think that really accelerated things, was sort of drinking to numb the anxiety that came from that situation. And I find it hard to pinpoint the one moment where it was like the rock bottom, because for me, it was one Monday morning where I woke up with a stinking hangover, had just been drinking alone by myself on a Sunday night. You know, the rest of the family had gone to bed. And that morning, I just decided that I'd had enough. And for me, the internal pain that I was living with at that point, of knowing that I needed to stop and knowing that I should stop, that pain reached the point where it outweighed the desire to drink. And that morning, I said to my wife, I'm going to go to an AA meeting this evening. I found the address, and I went that evening, and that was 2.5 years ago, and I haven't had a drink since. But honestly, I had up the list of local AA meetings for about 6 months prior to that point, because it had been on my mind for so long. You know, I knew something was wrong, but the compulsion to drink outweighed the compulsion to make a change until that morning.
I've got a couple of questions in here, but I was the same. Like it took me. I knew I didn't want to drink anymore, and I drank for different reasons. It was less a compulsion to drink and more of an expectation. Like I thought that's what was expected of me, and that's what I needed to do in order to be connected to people and have like human connection. So I was like forcing myself to drink for probably like years, because that's what I needed. I thought I needed to do to have a meaningful connection with my friends and family. But it took a really long time for me, like I think internally making the decision to actually actioning it. Why do you think it took you so long to actually action it?
I think a few things. first one, like I said at the start, was just, you know, at least where and how I grew up, it was just normal and expected, right? You had your first drink when you were in your early teens. That was how you socialized. The town I grew up in, we found a snooker bar that would serve us booze when we were underage. So that's where we went, and it just carried on. So I think one part of it was not realizing that it was a problem. Another part of it was I was afraid that it would redefine my relationship with my friends and with myself, because of the fact that so much of how we spent our time together was associated around alcohol. Now, I'm very lucky with the group of friends I have. It turned out to be a totally unfounded fear, and I've had nothing but support, and we're still able to socialize in the same ways. I just don't drink. But I was afraid because of the societal pressures or perceived societal pressures, at least, of what it means to drink and what it means to not drink. And I think I was also feeling like I had pressure on myself to not admit that I had a problem, because the scariest thing was sitting in that first AA meeting and saying for the first time, like, my name's Tim and I'm an alcoholic. Because up until that point, I had been playing around with this thought in my head that I should probably stop drinking and that I perhaps was having a problem, but I wasn't facing into it. And so I think there was a number of things that kept me drinking for longer than I should. The societal pressure, the pressure I was putting on myself, and then what I perceived to be other people's expectations, and then what their thoughts would be of me if I said I had a problem, if I said I wanted to stop drinking.
Wow, and I completely relate to all of those things as well.
Yeah.
And I commend your bravery in being able to kind of actually say, no, I'm an alcoholic, and draw that line in the sand. Like it took me a whole year to actually say the words to people, I don't drink. Because for the first 6 months, it was like, well, I'm training for the marathon, so I'm not drinking because I'm training for the marathon. And then after the marathon, I continued to make excuses for not drinking. And I think it took so much courage to actually start saying the words, no, I don't drink.
I do wonder, like, if it would be harder for me if I was just trying to do what you did, which was say, no, I don't drink. Because I did do it for periods where, so I did a couple of triathlons and I would not drink in the run up to the training. And then, you know, immediately it was finished, there was an expectation that you have a beer at the finish line, or, you know, you go out afterwards and you have some beers. And there were times where I did that, but it was almost harder to verbalize a choice not to drink. Whereas I feel like if I don't tell everyone, although I've shared publicly the reasons why I stopped drinking, but if you say to someone you're an alcoholic, you know, they're very, very unlikely to push you to drink. And more often than not, they don't quite know what to say anyway. Whereas if it feels like it's a choice, it can be, or at least some people might question it in a way that they don't if you say, this is an actual alcohol dependency I have, therefore I don't drink.
And that's it. As soon as I started to say the words, I don't drink. No, thanks, I don't drink. And with confidence, people immediately were just like, oh, okay, fine. You know, occasionally I get a few probes, but if I added any more in there, if I'd said, I don't drink anymore, then people go, oh, okay, so why don't you drink now? Oh, go on, you can have one. And they start to open up that thing. But actually just the best excuse, or, you know, or the best response you can ever give somebody is, no, I don't drink.
Yeah.
Because then people just go,
absolutely. What, not even at a wedding? Not even at a funeral? Not even at a birthday?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Right? Yeah, it's hard. And so, tell me a little bit about your experience with AA.
Yeah. Well, I don't go anymore, and we can talk about that. But I found it didn't work for me in terms of, you know, my life and what I needed. But it did do its job in terms of getting me sober. I think when I talk about the pain I was feeling emotionally, that eventually outweighed the desire to drink, the pain was knowing I wanted to stop drinking, but not knowing how, and knowing that I was letting myself down, that I was letting my family down, letting my kids down, my wife down, not being a great friend, employer, person, employee rather, person. And I was just living with that pain, because each morning I'd wake up and say, I don't want to drink anymore. And the minute it clocked past lunchtime, I was ready for the next drink and thinking about the next drink. And the minute I had one, I was off again. And I wanted it to stop, but I didn't know how. And the scary thing for me was I used to be able to take a break if I was training for something, right? Like I said, if I was doing a triathlon or a run, I'd stop for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, or I'd just say, oh, I'm not going to drink for a few weeks. And in the run up to me stopping, every time I tried to do that, and I picked a time period, like a week, 2 weeks, a month, I was able to get through less and less of it before I needed to drink. So I knew something was wrong. I could see it coming, and it was eating me up inside. And I honestly, I hated myself by the end of it. I was in a really bad place. I just didn't know what to do, because every morning I woke up, I wanted to drink again. So the sort of last call in my mind was to go to an AA meeting, something which I'd held off for some time. And I turned up, and I was greeted warmly, and I didn't know what to expect. But as we went around the room and did the formalities that I'm sure everyone knows about, or at least has seen portrayed in film and TV, it felt like a 10-ton weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I was suddenly able to put a name to what was wrong, and I was in a room full of people who felt the same thing. Because up until that point, I would see people, put the cork back in a bottle of wine, or stop after 1 pint, or say, no, they've had enough. And that just wasn't me. Like, I just couldn't do that. Like, if that wine was open, like, it was gone. And so suddenly I was in a room with people who were the same and who knew that. And for me, the most powerful thing that I got from AA was knowing that I was an alcoholic, knowing that there were people like me, and knowing that there was a path out of it. And the thing that I think landed with me most on that first evening, well, there was 2 things. One was everyone was saying, I never thought I would be the person that did X until I did, right? I never thought I'd be the person that drank in the morning until I did. I never thought I'd be the person that stole alcohol until I did. Took my kids' pocket money to buy the last bottle of booze that I could, right? No one thinks they're that person until they slide that far, that's where they end up. And I consider myself lucky that for one reason or another, the morning I woke up, I just hadn't reached that point, but I know full well that I could have. There's no difference between me and the person in that room who, was in rehab. And the other thing that struck me was when I was talking to people and I was explaining about my life and my family, someone asked me, and are your wife and children still with you? And it hadn't even occurred to me that if I didn't get a handle on this, I could lose my family. And there were people there that had happened to. And so we all have, or at least, I had this perception of what an alcoholic is, right? It's the person on the park bench. It's the person you walk past in the street with some tins of cider around them. But I was suddenly in a room filled with people who were alcoholics that just did not match that stereotype. And then I had to rationalize the fact that I also was an alcoholic. You would probably call it a functioning alcoholic, though I'm not sure there's such a thing. And that was just not a label that I had previously put on myself. But I found it freeing to be able to do that. And as it plays into, traditional tropes around like masculinity and what it means to be vulnerable and what it means to share, the other most powerful and for me unanticipated benefit of Alcoholics Anonymous was going into a room with like-minded people. Not all men, but in my situation, or it happened to be where I was, it was predominantly men sharing, like vulnerably. And it was the first time in my life where I had been in a setting where that was the case. And I shared things in those rooms that I had not told anyone before. And I said things that I hadn't told my best friends, my wife, my parents. And it was honestly an illuminating experience to connect with a part of myself that hadn't existed when I was drinking. And so I always say about AA, like, it did its job of getting me sober. I always know it's there. It just happened to not be the modality I needed to carry on with my sobriety journey. But I am forever grateful that as an organization, it exists, because I don't know where I'd be today without it.
Yeah, it sounds like an incredible start to your sobriety journey. What was the reason why you didn't carry on?
At that point, I had just taken a job, again, to come on to, I guess, some of the other, tropes around masculinity, but I thought I was pursuing like bigger job, bigger money, bigger career, do the thing, climb the ladder. And I had made a really bad career decision right at the point as this was all happening. And honestly, I was in a bit of a mess. So I was sort of reaching out for a few different things to help. So at the same time as I was going through AA, I was working with a coach, I was seeing a therapist. And what I realized inadvertently was I ended up using AA as another thing to tell myself I was failing at. And it's not a critique of AA by any means. I know it works for a lot of people, and like I said, it's truly fantastic. I just found it didn't work for me. And what didn't work for me was there's a certain sort of cadence and expectation of you attending a certain number of meetings each week, not because like that's what you're supposed to do from an organizational perspective, but more because typically the people who show up more and get involved are those who stay sober. I had 2 young kids at the time. I had other things that I was involved in. And I just found that I couldn't, and actually didn't necessarily want to, go to 3, 4, 5 meetings a week. And there are many people who do, and that's great for them. It just didn't work for me that way. And when I was speaking to my therapist about it, I realized that all I had done was giving myself another thing to beat myself up about, because I wasn't doing it right, I wasn't going to enough meetings, wasn't doing the steps. But what I started to unpack, and what I've been working on for the last few years, is there's lots of different ways to deal with the thing that got you there, and manage your recovery in your own way. And for me, I found that the sort of rigor and cadence of that program just wasn't for me, and I found other ways to do it. But I would never use my example as I would never say to anyone, don't do it, just because of how powerful it is, and how amazing it is as an organization. The fact that it's free at the point of service, you turn up, right, and they've got people here who for close to 100 years have been getting people sober. So I would never say to someone, don't go, and I would never critique it as a way to get sober. It's just, for me, it didn't fit in with my way of getting sober.
You're not the first person that I've spoken to that said it is a huge time commitment. And when you've got young children at home and you're supporting a family and, everything else, especially if you're working with a coach and a therapist and other things, it is a huge time commitment. But without a doubt, they do great work. Let's unpack this kind of feeling of failing, because I think so many people can relate to that, myself included. And I often bite off more than I can chew, and sometimes it works, and then sometimes it doesn't. And that feeling of failing at multiple things at the same time can really haunt you.
Yeah, it can, and I think, look, everyone's story is different, and everyone's sort of makeup and value system and life experiences up to today is different, and so certainly wouldn't pretend to be able to prescribe any sort of definitions around some of this stuff. What I would say for me is that what I had not noticed and was playing into my relationship with alcohol was a massive inner critic and a perception that anything I did wasn't necessarily good enough. And a lot of that, which is why I focused my coaching work on men, was wrapped up with the expectations of what it is to be a man, a father, a husband, and the societal expectations of masculinity. And so what I found was I had an unhealthy relationship with, obviously, alcohol, but then also my career in terms of what I thought I wanted in life, and as it turns out, what I actually want in life. And it wasn't until I was able to put a name to this inner monologue that I had, and realized the power that it had over my decisions and my decision-making process, that I was able to actually start doing something about it. And, if anyone is feeling like they have a version of this, I would encourage them to do their own self-work, because this is just how it shows up for me. It doesn't mean it will be the same for other people, but there were some childhood experiences that played into it. There is a big sort of people pleaser element that played into it. And so you end up saying yes to things that you should say no to. You end up over sweating what people think of you, and what people are going to think of what you put out in the world, or what people are going to think of your work, or your decisions. Because of the combination of those things and a desire to sort of do well, you can end up feeling like, or I felt like I was ending up failing a lot, because I had created a really high bar for myself that most of the time just couldn't clear. And AA became another part of that, right? It's like, I've got to go 5 nights a week, and do this and do that and and once again, I'd set myself up to fail. And so for me, there's a few different things that play into the origins of that feeling of failure. But had to be able to understand it and name it to do something about it.
Yeah, I'm nodding because it's like, same, very similar journey. And have done a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy to really like retrain the way I think about things, and my perfectionist behaviors were causing me so much anxiety in my early 20s, and and that kind of fear of failing, or feeling like you're failing or all the time was really difficult to manage. and really had to retrain my brain, and I'm still doing it now. I'm still definitely kind of like biting off more than I can chew, but I really feel you on that. And do you think expectations of what it is to be a man like fed into that?
Yeah, I think so, and probably in a couple of ways. One, because of how I felt I should be showing up as a husband and a father, which was, I guess, in the more classic and potentially outdated like provider role, right, where my job was to like just I don't want to paint it as like a train wreck or anything. I was trying to do my best, but I was overvaluing like career, money, and time at work, when I should have been, and now today do spend my time very differently. There was an unhealthy relationship I had there, and that plays into a bit of the fear of failure, because I also had unhealthy relationships with what it meant to be a man and have a relationship with food and exercise and alcohol and that kind of thing. And so those things just combined to create this like whole mess that was not allowing me to be my best self. And at the same time, having really high expectations of myself across all of those areas, and then not meeting them, and then feeling like I was failing, and the cycle continues. And I think the other thing was not talking about it, or knowing how to talk about it, or knowing it was all right to talk about it. Because for a long time I knew something was wrong, but I thought my thing to do was suck it up, crack on, do the work, and just wait for all of the shit to pass and just bury the feelings down. And, we know that doesn't work, right? I know that doesn't work for me. And you only have to look at some of the, mental health statistics for men in the UK to know that it's not working for other men too. And so for me, it was two components. It was how I felt I should show up in the world, and doing a pretty bad job at it. And then when it wasn't working and it wasn't feeling good, and I was feeling for some time like something was off, not feeling like it was the right thing to do, to talk about it or share, or go and see a therapist, or, maybe try meditating, or like these things that previously I would just be like, oh, that's just a bit woo-woo, right? That's not for me. I'll just crack on. I'll do the work. That's not really for a bloke, and forget it. And, I know now that is an unhealthy view for me to have, but that's just how I did it, and I know I'm not alone. And so those expectations and those societal pressures were things that were playing into where I got to. And I was working with a client a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about these things, and he said, I wish men would talk about it, because the problem is I've yet to meet a man, and we talk about this, and they aren't feeling some part of it. Right. Some people, of course, have got everything together, and that's absolutely fine. And for some people, yeah, or at least on the outside. And some people, for whatever reason, feel like they don't need it. Right. But I've yet to meet someone and have a conversation about this where there isn't some part of it going on for them. It doesn't have to be for me. The catalyst for this was getting sober, but people can have a perfectly healthy relationship with alcohol and still be feeling a lot of these same things. But we'll just suffer in silence because we're not programmed to talk about it. And I think that is one of the most unhelpful tropes to have.
There are so many men in my life that I know will be listening to this, that will go, this is going to ring so true to them. And so what did you start to do about it?
The first thing was ask for help. Really, that's what AA is, right? The first thing you do is, you recognize that you're powerless, and you need help. And so the first thing to do was to get help and name it and say I was struggling. And then I just tried some different things, clung on to those that were working and made a positive impact, let go of the things that weren't, and really switched to a mindset of sort of trusting the process rather than just like waiting for something to change. And there was a few modalities that I tried, and a few areas that I was focusing on making change on. And for each of those, I just tried to change some habits and switch to process. And what I mean by that is, one of the main things that I think is a source of discontentment with the men that I speak to is a sense of, purpose, and a lot of that, being wrapped up in our career and our work. And, you get to a certain age and perhaps you've got a partner, perhaps you've got kids, you've done what you were supposed to do, right? You've gone to uni, you've got the job, you've got the career, hopefully you're, or perhaps you're doing well and progressing and all that kind of thing. And you turn around and like, you've got all the things that you're supposed to have, that were supposed to be the things that gave your life meaning and satisfaction, and they turn out to be empty. And I was grappling with this question of like, does my work matter? So it wasn't like I hated my job by any means. I quite enjoyed parts of it, but I was beginning to find it unfulfilling. So what I mean by sort of trusting the process and changes that I made was started to take a systematic approach to wondering, how do I like spending my time? How do I not like spending my time? And what are the things that I would like to pursue differently? And how can I test those so that I can start to build the life and career I want? And through that, I was able to sort of prototype a few different things, and that has led me to roughly where I am today. But it also led me to discovering things that I hadn't previously considered. So, for example, I was feeling like, fuck the desk job, I'm going to throw it all in and I'm going to become a police officer or a firefighter or whatever, something that matters. And actually, I was like, what I realized is that that's probably not the right thing for me, as great as those careers are. But I found a way to volunteer with an organization that gave me a little bit of that. And so feeling like I could actually, achieve something that I wanted without throwing everything else away. Same with health and fitness, like redefining my relationship with diet and exercise, particularly not waking up hungover every day was amazing. Realizing the benefit that I could achieve in my mental health from really focusing on my physical health and redefining my relationships there. And so it's a very long-winded way of saying the first step was to ask for help. And then the second step was to work with other people. Like I said, a coach, a therapist, and there's so many amazing books, podcasts, resources out there. And just start trying some things and find what works for you, and hold loosely the things that don't. But ultimately, the biggest thing was just starting to make change, just starting to take action. And that for me sort of helped it come full circle of redefining masculinity for me was taking those masculine stereotypical sort of phrases and tropes of strength, dependability, provider, and that kind of thing, and redefining those for how I now wanted to show up in the world and how could I manifest those in a way that is the world I want to live in, right? So for me, strength and discipline now becomes the strength to, exercise when I don't want to, or the strength to take time out of my day to look after my mental health by meditating or journaling when I feel like I don't want to or I don't need to, or it's a bit of a waste of time. Because I know if I don't do those things, I can slip back to where I was. And so for me, things like strength and discipline and accountability, we can shift those and apply them to more healthy habits and healthy ways of living so that we can drag ourselves out of this sort of pit of just feeling like we're doing what we're supposed to do and shut up and don't talk about it and just put your head down.
I love that you have redefined those definitions of masculinity and to what works for you and what's relevant to you, and maybe what's relevant to men living in this decade than previously. I really like that. And I think what a lot of people don't understand is that or don't expect, and I didn't expect when I stopped drinking, for so much to come up. And I definitely wasn't alcohol dependent at all. I'd really whittled down my drinking to very little, but by the time that I'd actually quit. So I wasn't expecting to do the work, or needing to do the work in terms of, I thought I knew who I was and I thought I knew what I wanted out of life. But kind of 6, 8, 9 months into sobriety, all of this stuff starts to come up and you end up almost being forced to do a lot of self-reflection. And I think it's probably because you do start to have a little bit more time where you're a bit more clear-headed and you start to do the work, you start to learn a bit more, you get into, you're reading more, you're opening your mind up a little bit more, and you're learning more, and you start to kind of ask those questions of, okay, actually, what type of person do I want to be? Who do I want to be? What are my values? What's important to me? How do I want to spend my time? Now I've got more time because I'm not sitting around drinking or I'm not feeling hungover. How do I want to use my time? What value do I want to add to the world? And it's incredible what can actually come out of that, and growth that can happen when you remove a substance.
Yeah, totally. And something you've just said there, which is so true, I think, is the time. Because certainly by the end, like when I was sitting, drinking, I certainly wasn't being productive. And then the next morning, I certainly wasn't being productive either. And so, everyone's looking for like productivity hacks and, ways to, get more free time and that kind of thing. And like that was just one of the biggest ones for me. The massive unlock was realizing that you can reclaim your evenings, reclaim your mornings in a way that just wasn't possible before. And I think there is for certainly for me previously, I'm ashamed to say, like the vision I had in my head of someone who didn't drink was like someone who didn't have fun, someone that was boring, like someone who's probably just lived their life in monochrome. And like the truth couldn't be more different. And the reality is that, like, of course, the nights look different, the evenings look different. But I still, go out to the pub with my mates. We still do weekends away. We still do all of the things that we used to do before, really. My relationship with it's just different. And I might be the first to go home, although not always, because often I'm the one who can still walk home. But we can still, you gain so much back just from a pure time perspective. That was one of the unintended benefits and consequences for me, as you said.
And it's funny, it's like I'm actually making my dreams come true. Is that before I was like, but when I was drinking, it's like, God, I want to run a marathon one day, or God, I'd love to have a podcast one day, or I'd love to start my own business, or just I want to be a really, really present mom. I want to have loads of fun with my kids, not feel really stressed. And it's like all of these things that I wanted for myself that felt so hard or felt impossible or felt like I didn't have the capacity to do them. As soon as I removed even just 2 drinks a week by the end, I really wasn't drinking a lot at all. As soon as I removed them, I had the capacity to make my dreams come true. And it's amazing, really. I don't think people quite realize the transformation that can actually happen.
One thing I wanted to add, if it's all right, on the masculinity piece and redefining it is, I think sometimes from some people there's an aversion to some of this, because the expectation is that we'll end up with a load of like blubbering, useless men who all they do is talk about their feelings and never achieve anything. And I'm being somewhat flippant, but I think there is a reaction almost to some of this, right? Because there is, nobility and value in some of those masculine traits, right? They've originated from somewhere, and there's definitely value in those. And I guess the most important thing that I've tried to find for myself is the balance, right? I don't think anyone is asking for men to suddenly, become, incapable of any of the things they were capable of previously. And one of the things there's 3 pillars to the coaching that I do with men, and they are intentionally all sort of action oriented, and there's a very strong sort of physical capability moment in there, as well as a mental discipline moment in there. And so I think the thing that I would want to stress is we're not asking men, or I'm not asking men to totally swing the pendulum in the other direction. I'm really asking to add something to what's already there. Add an ability to talk, add an ability to do some self-work, add an ability to ask your questions, and then bring the strengths that you do have to that new version of you, and have that be the version that shows up in the world. One that is able to ask for help when you need it. And that doesn't mean that you don't still take action, because we can do all the talking we want, but unless you actually do something, nothing will change. But I guess the one thing that I do want to make clear, and it is something that I talk about with my clients too, is this concept of like balance, and finding the right balance of like, when do we need to talk, when do we need to ask for help, and then when do we need to like actually do the work. Because self-compassion is important, but if you have so much self-compassion you don't do anything hard, then that's also not going to help, because none of us are never going to have hardships in our life. And the benefit and mental fortitude that you get from doing hard things that you don't want to do repeatedly is just incredible, right? You know this if you've run a marathon, you know, the amount of work that you have to put into training. And really the hard work is the training. Like doing the marathon is just the like celebration at the end. It's the like 3, 4, 5 months before, when you have to go out running when it's raining and you don't want to, that is the hard part. And so, you know, really the most important thing I think for me is this balance of, like, if you use self-compassion as the example, when do you need to look after yourself? When do you need to ask for help? And when do you need to tap back into that masculine trait, and use it as a force for good, rather than something that is a blunt instrument and you aren't using it in the best way you can.
I love this way of thinking about it, because I wanted to ask her, like, how can men, when they're in maybe a toxic masculine environment, be it at work, and we see it a lot at work, where, you know, you're expected to go out and drink with clients and drink quite heavily and entertain, and you know, kind of be very much kind of a man's man. You might see it in sports, you might see it at the pub with your friends. You know, how can they work through that, or how can they, you know, is it like you were saying, the balance, you know, of when to dial that up versus dial it down? I don't know kind of what the answer is there.
Yeah, no, it's look, the massive caveat I would say is that everyone's answer to this will be somewhat different, and the situation will be somewhat different. But for me, it all stems back to that first piece of work, which is like, who are you and who do you want to be? Because that will be the thing that allows you to make decisions like that. So when I first work with men, there's two things we do first. One is a coaching exercise called the Wheel of Life. I don't know if you've ever done it, but it's one of these things, one of these sort of wheel diagrams where you've got different points around the circle, you know, finances, family, friends, spirituality, love, health, and you score yourself on there. And it's a really great way to audit how things are going in different areas of your life, and you get a visual at the end of it that shows you, you know, what might be off track and what might be on track. That is a really great way to pinpoint where in your life you might be finding something is out of sync. Maybe it is work, like you described. Maybe you realize that actually your relationship with your friendship group has changed and you might need to rethink that. Maybe it's a lack of spirituality, whatever that means for you, right? It doesn't have to mean religion. And then once you've got that, the second piece of work that I always do is some values work, some personal values. So what are your values, whether those are how you're showing up in the world now, or whether those are aspirational values. Because a combination of those two things, knowing perhaps where things are feeling off track right now, and then knowing your values, because you can use those to then make decisions, will probably help you to answer most of the questions that you framed there around, like, what should men do? Because the reality is, it's hard, and it's certainly not my place to say, quit your job, you know, take a new career, do this, do that. Because the reality is, like, you know, you've got families, you've got commitments, you've got things like that. Like, most people aren't just going to be able to, like, flip the table off and go, fuck you guys, I'm redesigning my life. Like, certainly I didn't do that, right? This has been a multi-year process. But the first part of it was to identify what's wrong, right? Why am I feeling this? Is it the guys at work? Is it my friends? Actually, are the guys at work fine? I just don't find work fulfilling. Am I upset because I used to be in good shape and now I'm not? Like, what is it that's wrong? And then when you know your values and you know what's important to you, then you can start to make decisions on it. And then you can start to build out a timeline for when do you want to get there. Because everyone's timeline will look slightly different based on what they're willing to give up to get there. And then, like, the practicalities of, like, how much do you need to earn? Like, someone might be able to take a 12-month career break and totally redefine things and retrain or do something, whatever it may be. Others won't. You know, it's going to be a slow arc where you slowly change your career, or maybe you don't even change career, maybe you change companies, or maybe you do stay in the same career, but you just change your relationship with work, or you go part-time, or whatever it may be. Like I started by going part-time, for example. And that was the genesis of this. But you cannot understate the difference it will make to know that you are on the right path. Because up until that point, if you're just sitting with unease and your outlet is alcohol or something else, nothing will change and nothing will get better.
Oh, there's so many incredible insights in here, and learnings and actions. This is so valuable, and there are so many men that we need to get to listen to this episode. I'm literally listening to you and I'm like, you need to start a podcast.
I am.
Really, you need to. Let me know if you need any help.
Thank you.
Because you really, really need to talk more about this, because it's so valuable and so important. Just before kind of we wrap up, I really want to talk a little bit about the feel good folk, particularly the 3 pillars that you've got: be happy, be healthy, be useful. Can you just talk a little bit about the 3, where they came from and how they support men in their journey of transformation and growth?
So when I was doing this, the self-work that you spoke about, and analysing how I wanted to spend my time and how I wanted to spend my career, I realised that, I really enjoy one-to-one interactions. I really enjoy conversation, and I really enjoy coaching. I always enjoyed that part of my professional career. And so I completed a ICF accredited life coaching course. I also completed a gym instructor course, because the other part that I realized had been so important in my recovery was looking after my physical health and my well-being. And not just because, it's good to be healthy, but because I found you're flexing the same mental muscle when you get up in the morning and do a workout that you don't want to do, or you go out and run when it's raining, you don't want to do it, as you are when you turn down a drink when actually you might sort of want to drink, right? I still walk past a beer garden on a summer's day and look at the cold pint and go, well, actually, for a minute, that might be quite nice. But, it's just entirely not the right thing for me to do. Anyway, I got to this by realizing that I really liked one-to-one work. I really liked conversation, and hadn't quite appreciated it in the time that I was doing it. But I had really tried a few different modalities and landed on something that works for me. And when I broke it down, I realized that it all fell into 3 pillars, which was this: be happy, be healthy, be useful. And they all intersect with each other. So they're each required, but they're not individually sufficient to create a fulfilling life. So be happy is really about understanding the sources of joy in your life and finding a way to design them into your day, week, month, so that when you look back, you haven't just felt like you're on the hamster wheel of work. Everyone's sources of joy will be different. It could be family and friends, it could be hobbies, it could be time alone. But again, it sounds silly, but until you actually know truthfully what they are, and then actually find a way to build them into your life, you can very quickly feel like you're just weeks are slipping by and you're not enjoying yourself. And, I use happiness and happy as the word, but really it's about contentment, because we're not all going to be elated all the time. It is just about, waking up in the morning feeling contented, or going to bed at night feeling contented, not, miserable or the Sunday night blues or whatever it may be. Healthy is one, because my relationship with exercise and nutrition changed totally after I got sober. I used to be quite a bit heavier than I am now, quite a bit unhealthier. Drinking always led to smoking, and often led to drugs as well. And removing those things, obviously, quick win. But then, like I said, when you wake up and you're not hungover, you can do things that you couldn't do previously. And that led into revisiting my relationship with food and how I wanted to eat, more plants, that kind of thing. But there is this mental act, or there is this mental benefit that comes with physical training. One, in terms of, well-reported benefits on improving your cardiovascular health and what that can do for your mental well-being, but also, like I said, this act of training the mind by training the body, and the benefit you get from the two. For me also, I got into long distance running, and I did it without podcasts and music, because I actually found that to be truly meditative, like getting out and running, or for other people it could be cycling or swimming or walking the dog or whatever it may be. I found that to be a truly meditative experience, to get out with my thoughts, with an elevated heart rate, and just, spend time by myself. And Be Useful was about reimagining my career and what that could look like, and how I wanted to spend my time. And, the Feel Good Folk is really the manifestation of that, and recognizing that I wanted to spend more time helping other men work through what I had been through. And it came from someone asking me, like, what did you need 3 years ago? And I didn't need a PT, because I would have just skipped the workouts when I was hungover. I didn't need a career coach, because it wasn't really about, like, getting more senior, or I would have been making the decision based on the wrong value system. And it wasn't really about just like spending more time doing the things I liked, because a lot of those were wrapped up with like alcohol and also, not really knowing. I needed a blend of the three. And really the Feel Good Folk is my experiences and learnings over the last 3 years, combined with the courses that I've done to help other men go through that version of themselves and redefine their relationship with happiness, with health, and usefulness, which is really like purpose, and how do you want to show up in the world. And for me, like I said, that wasn't flipping the table over and like, starting some crazy side career. I still do some consulting work on the side in my professional capacity, but the Feel Good Folk is the manifestation of that, alongside some other things that I do on the side that align with my values and how I want to show up in the world. So it's really about helping men find their version of that for themselves.
And honestly, so much of this applies to women as well.
Yeah, totally.
It's so relevant as well for this.
I was almost uneasy saying that I was going to focus the business on men, because I know that it's not an isolated problem. But what I found in my experience was actually two women in my life said, you should do this for men, when I was sort of coming up with this. Because, it's not true for all women, but typically I find women find it easier to talk about some of these things and have a vocabulary that men don't. And for the reasons that we spoke about earlier, and certainly my experience was that, it's just not as common for men to approach these topics. The reason I do it is mostly because it's what I needed back then, and I know enough to know from conversations I've had since I started that I'm not alone.
And I think it's important for all men to know they're not alone. Yeah. And my therapist has said to me for the first time in her 20+ year career, she's seeing more men than women.
Yeah.
And so, that's saying a lot as well. I think there are more discussions, thankfully, to some great resources, great podcasts, great books that are out there, great men who have influence, who are talking about this as well. And so it's just incredible that you're creating something and offering services to support that as well.
And look, the reality is, like, partly it's driven out of, I certainly felt like with alcohol and with other things, I was at a bit of a crossroads, and there's different paths I could have gone down, and there's also like sources of masculinity out there, and sources of advice or inspiration that aren't so healthy, and men can easily go down that route too. And I think for me, a lot of this is about like, what world do I want to live in, and how do I want to think about the men around me and how they show up in the world. So a big part of it for me also is somewhat in response to almost an anxiety around like what I don't want men to become, and what I don't want the world to look like for my son and daughter to grow up in. And so I think that's also where action comes into this too, which is like, if we think that there are some, bad actors in this space too, intentionally or otherwise, it's our responsibility to do something about that and change ourselves to show up in a way that, we're proud to show our children, and we're proud to bring them up in a world of, supportive and powerful men, where, they're comfortable with their masculinity and it's updated for the current world, and not one that is, unhelpful and harmful.
Absolutely. We are running out of time, there's so much that I want to continue to talk to you about. So, maybe in 6 months we need to kind of have another catch up and get into this again. And I don't know why it just gave a thumbs down. Hopefully that's I don't know. It's like calm down, whatever. No, I want you to come back.
Yeah.
It won't do the bubbles now.
No.
No, but honestly, thank you so much for talking to me today. There's so many insights, and just so many learnings. And I think there are gonna be so many men and women out here who really relate to your story. So just really thank you so much for sharing your journey, and coming to talk to me. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
No, me too. Thank you for having me. Like I said at the start, it's my pleasure. And I think it's great for people like you to be doing the work you're doing and, sharing the stories you share. And keep it going. It's great service.
And I'm going to be texting you saying, when's your podcast ready? Because I think it really is something that you should do. And I'm sure you'll be able to kind of unearth some really amazing stories from men across the world who are feeling the same and maybe in completely different situations, but are still feel the same.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you.
To the listeners, if you resonated with Tim's story or you're ready to embark on your own journey of transformation, I encourage you to check out the Feel Good Folk website, and I'm going to link to everything for Tim down below. And just remember, I think it's never too late to kind of break free and change and, explore a different path. Like it really isn't. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Upward Spiral. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, share with anybody maybe who might benefit from hearing this conversation. Thank you so much for listening, as always, and I'll see you soon. Bye.